Our dear friend Gary Lineker will no longer be on the BBC. It's the final countdown for Mouth of the Day. Gary Lineker makes his exit from the BBC, so I thought it only fitting to give him a decent send-off. Frankly, if it were me making the decisions, he wouldn't get to do his last show today. But that aside, I thought I'd put together his top 3 indiscretions. At number 3, when Gary appeared to claim in a high-performance podcast that because of his darker skin, he'd experienced racism. Now, I ignored Gary because that is usually the best thing to do, but I'm afraid I couldn't let this one go. In his latest gaffe, he claims because of his darker skin, he's experienced racism. I almost choked on my drink. I bet he wished I had, because I wouldn't be around to point out how ludicrous that sounds. I'm black, Gary. You're white. See, now, I really wanted to make that number 1, but at number 2, Gary Lineker decided to criticise Government Minister Suella Braverman for her language, which he complained was akin to language used in the 1930s in Germany. So basically, Nazi Germany. He tweeted, "There is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order?" Suella Braverman was not impressed.
Well, I think it is, from a personal point of view, to hear that kind of characterisation is offensive because, as you said, my husband is Jewish. My children are therefore directly descendant from people who were murdered in gas chambers during the Holocaust. And my husband's family is very, feels very keenly the impact of the Holocaust, actually. And
Which is ironic that Gary should be spouting out about 1930s Germany, because his latest gaffe was probably that sort of language in itself, which brings me to number 1, the straw that broke the camel's back. Reposting an anti-Semitic trope, Mouth of the Day, Gary Lineker, proving just how ignorant he is and why people who exist in an ivory tower insulated from reality should butt out. Gary reposted a pro-Palestine anti-Semitic message that contained an image of a rat, which is an anti-Semitic trope akin to language used in 1930s Germany. Sound familiar? He has since taken it down and apologised.
Last week, I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like once again to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent. I know that. I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether.
Yes. Well, the BBC finally could take no more, and they sacked him. Tim Davie, BBC Director General, said, "Gary has acknowledged the mistake he made. Accordingly, we have agreed he will step back from further presenting after this season." Gary has been a defining voice in football coverage for the BBC for over 2 decades. His passion and knowledge have shaped our sports journalism and earned him the respect of sports fans across the UK and beyond. We want to thank him for the contribution he has made. Now, I don't care what Gary Lineker thinks about anything, and of course he's free to express his views, but if in doing so he breaches his contract with the BBC, a publicly funded broadcaster that requires its talent to stay neutral because we're paying for it, then he should forego his £1.3 million salary that he earns and leave, because I know from my own experience at the BBC that there is no way as a freelancer or a contractor that I would have been able to get away with the nonsense that Gary spouted and remain employed by them. Gary won't starve. He's got his own production company making him millions, and I'm sure some sad, washed-out channel may well pick him up and give him a job, and I suspect this will mark the start of his ramblings with his new-found freedom. Frankly, I don't care what Gary does or says from now on because I won't be forced to pay for him. I'm astounded that he was even allowed to do his final show on the BBC today, given the anti-Semitic message that he reposted. So it's goodbye and good riddance, Gary. You are now free of the BBC and I am no longer forcibly funding your ill-informed, nonsensical ramblings. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, would Tory MPs be wrong to oust Kemi Badenoch? Here's what she thinks.
All these people giving anonymous quotes are cowards. I'm not scared of cowards. These are the sorts of people, I said, who underestimate me. I'm fighting for this party. I'm fighting for the future of our country.
Well, a defiant Conservative leader on GB News earlier today amid reports some MPs think that it's time for her to go. We will debate that. Then in the second Great British Debate of this hour, I'm asking, is Donald Trump right to be concerned about free speech in the UK? This comes as US officials have been sent to Britain to meet activists over their concerns. But is he right to be meddling in UK domestic affairs? All of that on the way as ever. Send me your thoughts, post your comments at gvnews.com/yoursay. Well, I'm joined now by former head of religion and ethics at the BBC, Akil Ahmed. Akil, am I being unfair and unkind to Gary, or is it actually about time he went, and are you surprised that he's actually managed to present the final show today?
Well, no, I don't think you are. I mean, you're entitled to have your opinion. That's the whole point, right? You have your opinion. He has his opinion. I think there's a lot of.
But he does work for the BBC. You know, he does work for the BBC.
No, but I think we could have a conversation there about the specifics of his case. And what this does tells all of us is that actually we have to wake up to the fact that obviously he's not a staff member. It's one day a week. It becomes really hard to police. And I think the BBC have made that decision now. I think it's a lot easier for other people who are not as famous as Gary for them to police these kind of issues about people who only have a one-day-a-week contract and all those kind of things. I think it's the right time for him to move on because it is becoming difficult because of the amount of kind of opinions that Gary has had. He's entitled to have them because he's not a current affairs presenter, but it has become difficult, I think. But what it does make us do, I think, going forward is we have to start to think about all broadcasters, all companies, about how do you navigate this kind of portfolio career thing where somebody doesn't work for you full time, yet you quite rightly expect them to adhere to certain kind of values.
No, that does.
That's just my opinion, but you can disagree with it. But I know how hard it is to police this.
It's not that I'm disagreeing with you, and I'm not saying that you should have it.
No, I have to try and police this, and when you try and police it, it's not easy.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I get it, but when you are top talent, irrespective of whether you are a full-time or freelancer, and I know this, I wasn't top talent, OK? I'd had a little show, it was more music-based, there was news in it, but I was not a news presenter, as it were, although I did do other news things later on. But I would not have been allowed to make the comments that Gary Lineker made at all, even though, and I lost shows because of it. I made comments on somewhere else, that not even on the BBC, but I was in a similar place as him as a freelancer and then at one point a contractor. I got in trouble. I lost 2 shows as a result of that because I'd said something that they weren't happy with. See, now, he repeatedly did exactly what I did, but yet he stayed there. And he is one of their highest paid star there. He has an extra responsibility. He should have gone a long time ago.
That we can debate for a long, long time. The fact of the matter is he has gone. I think this was a decision that was probably made quite a while ago. Well, I think it was a decision made quite a while ago. There are different ways you can kind of like get rid of people and do things. And actually, there's a conversation had about, you know, a new head of sport came in last year. There's going to be a new head of output across the BBC coming in this year. You know, when you've been around a long time, the first thing that you can do when someone new comes in, one of the first things they do is actually want to set their mark and set their stamp on things. And Gary was that person. So I think Gary was out anyway. What has happened is that this has been kind of it's happened a lot quicker because of the appalling thing that he retweeted, and he apologized, etc. But I think sometimes there comes a point where it's too late and we all have to agree you've got to move on. There's no kind of easing this way out. End of the season, it's all over. And I think that was the decision that was made. I think a decision was probably made a bit earlier that he would be eased out over time, and they'd made all those kind of announcements, and it was probably going to happen. But I think it's been escalated, and it was the right thing to do, in my opinion, to escalate it. Because I think after a while, it becomes a distraction, and it had become a distraction. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with every single thing that's been said about him, but I think it had become a distraction at the end.
And also, the other thing is the BBC is paid for by the licence fee payer, which is the public, and the role of the BBC is to offer impartiality, because that is kind of the contract that they're signing with us for us to continue to pay for it. And we don't want somebody throwing down propaganda at us, whether they're in sport, news or anything. That is the deal. When you join an employer, you have a contract with that employer. And within his contract...
He had a contract with that. He didn't have a full-time contract, none of
That's irrelevant.
I'm not saying...
No, it's irrelevant.
But it isn't irrelevant.
No, it isn't.
No, it's
because
not.
the BBC guidelines... No, you are wrong. The BBC guidelines...
No, I'm not wrong on this, because I'm talking about... Well, then why has it not been policed?
No, the BBC guidelines...
I worked there a long time and I was a senior manager as well.
Yeah, but the BBC guidelines... The BBC guidelines...
When he is
it doesn't
working
matter.
with the BBC.
It doesn't matter.
It does matter.
It doesn't
technically,
matter.
it's...
No, it doesn't.
Well, you can talk over me if you like.
I'm not talking over you. You're actually talking over me.
Well, you are actually,
because I wanted
I'm trying
to
to say something. All right, I won't say anything. Carry on lecturing me, because I was trying to say something.
Yeah, but I was talking and you actually interrupted. You didn't let me finish, and then you carried on talking over me, and then you told me I'm talking over you. What I'm saying is that the BBC guidelines, and I know this because I've only recently worked for them, and it meant that you were not allowed to give opinions and things like that, even on other stations, even if you weren't a full-time member of staff. I know this because it applied to me.
Yeah. But you have to police this, and the fact of the matter is, the question you have to ask yourself is, do you really think that barristers, lawyers, QCs, KCs now actually weren't involved in conversations about what they can and can't do? And I think it was difficult to police it because it's not simplistic. I agree with you, right? I completely agree with you, but it's not as simple as that. So yes, that in principle, but the problem is policing it, and I think that's what they've decided with a high-profile character like he is, to let it go and to let him go. But I think the simply to say that actually he was in breach of all these things, if he was, then they would have done something about it, but they couldn't do something about it. It's not that they didn't want to, but they couldn't, I bet. And that's the key, because they would have had a lot of legal advice on what they could and couldn't win. And actually, sometimes you let things go. And I think he was going to be he was gone anyway at the end of the season. We all knew that. So there was a decision that had already been made. It's just been escalated. But the bigger point I'm making is I agree with a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Policing it sometimes becomes difficult. Not always, but it becomes difficult, and I think Gary is one of them. Because the problem is, a lot of people do actually like him.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I can't vouch for that.
Well, I think they do.
I
think they do.
The thing is...
Well, they do.
The thing is...
They do like him.
I can't vouch for other people.
They do.
But the thing is, the problem was that this was not being applied evenly, because, again, I know people who work there now, and Gary put up something that was very offensive. And one of the people that I know that works there... One of the people who works there at the BBC then made a note saying, this is very offensive, Gary, so on and so forth. And they were asked, that person was told to take down their post. So he had to take his post down, but Gary could leave his up there. And it was more the unfairness and the uneven decisions, whereas other members of the BBC were not allowed to get away with as much as Gary. And this person worked as a freelancer, had one show a week on the BBC, and was told to take the post down.
And that's why they've come to that conclusion that obviously it doesn't work having Gary Lineker on the BBC. And that's the thing, they came to that same conclusion. I completely agree with you. The problem I was saying is actually, the problem was who he was, and the fact that it wasn't simplistic, and they would have taken that legal advice. I know for a fact, because that's what we always had to do with these things. They would have taken it, and they would have come to a decision that it probably wasn't, they probably weren't going to win, or it would have been incredibly expensive to win, or whatever. I could go on and on. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I would imagine that was the kind of conversation, because ultimately he has gone. Let's be honest. He's gone a long time ago.
Thank goodness, Akua Ahmed. Thank you very much for a robust conversation. Well, he can come back, but you just can't spout his opinion when he's on the BBC. That's what I think.